Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you for carving out a little bit of time, perhaps around your lunch hour this afternoon. My name is Dan Garuski. I am the manager of business engagement at Capital Workforce Partners, or CWP. Um, Thank you all for joining us. Today, we wanted to host this, brief but hopefully informative webinar session about a grant program that we have available, right now and through the end of 25 for businesses that is focused on layoff aversion and workforce retention. Um, for any of you that are familiar with CWP or who have worked with us, in the past, you know that we do a lot of work around hiring and skill development and resources for businesses to train and upskill their workforce. This is a different type of project that we are very excited to offer, that we've been had active for about a year now. But as the program is closing down, we wanted to make sure to get more information out to businesses to take advantage of the resources that we have. So today we're going to be covering the our business grants related to layoff aversion and workforce retention. You should all have access to a Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. If you do have any questions as we're going through the information today, please do use that feature. We will probably not get a chance to answer all of the questions that come through. But I will be sort of sending out a summary to the group, and we will be posting the Q&A online as well. So please do use that feature if you have any questions about what I'm going to get into today. I would also invite you to contact me directly if you have any questions that don't get answered during the session today, and my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So the goal for today, we're going to kind of just give a quick overview of this layoff aversion and workforce retention project. We're going to talk a little bit about how these resources can be used by businesses, the process for applying, and I think significantly some tips for creating a strong application. I will say a lot, but not all, but a lot of the information we're going to cover today is also contained on our website, capitalworkforce.org/layoff aversion grant. You can see a link on your screen, as well as a QR code that will take you directly to that page. So that is a great resource for, again, a lot of the information that I'm going to be covering today. So with that, let me just get into it. Okay. So just quickly, many of you I know in like reviewing the registration list, I know are familiar with CWP or maybe have worked with us before. For those of you that have not, we are a workforce development board covering North Central Connecticut. We serve 37 cities and towns, and our mission is to basically produce skilled workers for a competitive regional economy. So, we really have sort of two customer bases, both businesses and job seekers focused on North Central Connecticut, and basically ensuring that job seekers have the resources that they need to sustainable careers, and that businesses, for them to have a high quality, a well-aligned, and a sustainable pipeline of talent so that they can thrive in our region. You can see, last year we served just shy of 14,000 job seekers, and more than 1,800 employers. So that's a very brief 30-second overview of who we are and what we do. But I will leave it at that for now as far as CWP goes. Just with the invitation that if you are interested in learning more, particularly about the other services and resources that we have for businesses, I would encourage you to get in touch with me after the session. The Layoff Aversion Grant Program overview. The purpose of this project really is just to help employers in our region to design and implement strategies for layoff aversion and workforce retention. So, I mean, I know this is the case always, but I think especially right now, there's, a lot of uncertainty facing businesses, just with the labor market and just economics and all sorts of policy considerations. And sometimes that uncertainty can lead to impacts on your workforce. Sometimes that is an immediate impact, and sometimes it's longer term. So, a question that we get very often about this program is, does my organization need to be like actively laying off workers in order to be eligible for this grant? And the answer is no. For some companies, there is an immediate risk that they are looking to mitigate. Other employers who have applied for this resource, they're facing conditions where they're looking at the long-term impacts on their workforce, and they're looking to take steps to sort of mitigate those impacts. So I really want to make that clear, that this is a flexible program that is really geared towards, being kind of responding to the needs that businesses have, with a higher level goal of really, retaining and advancing workers. We want to keep folks employed in North Central Connecticut. And this is, hopefully flexible funding to help businesses implement strategies to do just that. The award amounts for this project are up to $20,000. And as far as like the timeline goes, we are currently accepting proposals. They are being reviewed and awarded on sort of a rolling kind of first come, first serve basis. The biggest sort of date to keep in mind for this project is December 31st of this year. And it's like as it's that date that any projects funded under this grant program need to be completed by. So, keep that in mind, that this is for, strategies and things that can be put in place, pretty quickly and also wrapped up pretty quickly. The only other thing I will note here, you can see the map on the right side of the screen. These are the 37 cities and towns that I mentioned, are kind of in our region, but CWP is one of actually 5 workforce development boards in Connecticut. And this layoff aversion grant, we are implementing this, with funds from the Connecticut Department of Labor. So I do know that in other regions, similar projects have been ongoing. And so if your organization is not within one of our cities and towns, please do reach out to me. And I will make sure to connect you to the right point of contact in your region, to see if you can get sort of access to the same supports through one of the other organizations that are working on this. Okay, so quickly, these are, this is kind of like a sampling of the main activities or strategies that can be funded with these grants. I will not read them all. These are all on our website, but it can be a range of different things. So that, like I said, this is fairly flexible funding. Worker upskilling and training has been like a really popular one and common one, kind of giving workers additional skills that they need, either to move into different roles or like ultimately, to, insulate them about positions that may be at risk. Feasibility studies, marketability, or marketing initiatives, or doing things like risk analysis on vulnerabilities, working with outside sort of business-facing organizations and things like that. Um, that said, this is not necessarily a fully exhaustive list. So, I would encourage you, if you are looking at putting in an application for these funds, it is okay if there are kind of multiple strategies within that. It all doesn't need to go entirely toward one thing. And if there is any sort of question about like if the things that you are proposing to do are allowable or not under the project, we'll kind of work with you once you've put in your application to sort of fine tune it and identify the things that are best aligned with the project. Okay, so just a bit about the process and what you can expect. So I would encourage anybody here, representing a business or employer, or if you are here, someone who is part of an organization that serves businesses, or you work with businesses on a regular basis. I would, and point you to our application. So at the website that I mentioned at the top of the session, you will see, actually, I'll give you kind of a quick preview of it. Our grant application. I realize this may be a little bit small to read, but there is an electronic submission form right on our website. There is also a PDF that you can download from that same website if you prefer to fill things in, kind of not on a web page interface. If you want to just fill in a PDF and submit that via email, that is another acceptable way to do it. But the whole process starts with an application. Um, then there's a review process, and that's something that we do on our end. There's a small team at CWP that reviews all the applications as they come in. And then there is a sort of parallel process that we do with the Connecticut Department of Labor, because this is funding that comes, it is actually, federal funding that's coming to us through Connecticut Department of Labor. But any business before being awarded a grant does need to go through a Department of Labor compliance check process. This is usually pretty quick, but we work with the Department of Labor and they verify that, businesses receiving grant funds do not have any, like outstanding tax liabilities or unresolved OSHA issues and a range of other sort of compliance things. We kind of facilitate that process with the Department of Labor. And again, it usually goes pretty quick, and any issues that come up, we can facilitate getting them resolved quickly so that we can move forward with the grant application process. But that is the review that happens. It's sort of this two-pronged review. At that point, there is like a short Q&A session segment. Will typically work with whoever your point of contact is, typically the person that applied for the funding within your organization, if any questions come up through our review process. So that can be a lot of different things. Sometimes we're just clarifying, like what the strategies are look like that you're proposing, how you're planning to use grant funds if they're awarded, understanding, any sort of like risks or timelines or things like that. This is just sort of a step that we take to ensure that we sort of, understand the contents of your application and kind of resolve any questions that come up. And at that point, a decision gets made. And if the grant is awarded, you would receive a contract from CWP that would be active, from that date through the end of the year, which is again when this project ends. At that point, all of the activities that you would put into your proposal are free to, get started. And, again, we would encourage you, since the project does need to be completed by the end of December, that you get started on that right away. It's also at this point that, as far as like payment is concerned, this is a common question we get, like, how do we actually receive the grant? At that point, you can invoice CWP, and we would typically send the grant payment within a couple of weeks. After that, the primary thing to sort of keep on the radar is just sort of reporting. So you would work with a member of my team or me directly, just to kind of check in on how the project is progressing. Typically, the reporting schedule includes like a 30-day just sort of narrative update, like what activities have gotten off the ground, how are things going, what have some of the early outcomes and challenges been. And then at the end of the project, there's a final narrative report. And that, those are the basic reporting requirements for this grant. Again, this is a picture of the application itself. I realize that it'll be a lot easier to see if you are on our website, but just some of the information to sort of have ready as you're going and preparing to put in the application. Just basic information about your organization. Two important ones are the business FEIN and the state of Connecticut tax ID numbers. Those are just sort of important for kind of record keeping. There are like sort of two main questions in the application, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But basically, we're trying to sort of understand kind of the conditions and sort of like the layoff risks that your company is facing. Because again, this is a project about workforce retention and both like sort of short-term and long-term planning to avert potential layoffs. And then a second question around, your plan. What strategies are you going to implement? And kind of detailing how your organization is planning to use the requested funds. And then the last part of the application is just contact information, a point of contact that would be able to, again, answer any questions that come up in that Q&A that I mentioned, and who would, that we would be able to sort of work with to kind of move the application forward. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to talk about are just some tips for a strong application. Um, I mean, the best advice I could give is really to, thoroughly and thoughtfully answer the questions that are in the application. That might seem pretty obvious, pretty self-explanatory. But I think the thing that our team is really looking to understand are kind of, whether it's short term or sort of long term, what are the roles and the kind of economic factors that are putting your organization sort of at risk? Like they're creating some of this risk for your workforce. Kind of, explaining that in as much detail as possible is helpful. Again, the bar is not that there are immediate layoffs planned. That's not at all what this project requires. In fact, I think in many situations, like this is like a great sort of strategic planning kind of opportunity for business that are kind of, doing that analysis, looking down the road at some of the headwinds that they're facing and the things that they can do to invest in their workers to make them as sustainable as possible in the future. So helping our team understand that is a great first step in getting a good application together. Being clear about your kind of budget and how you're planning to use the funds. A very common aspect of our Q&A with businesses that have applied for this resource are like kind of clarifying, if you're requesting a $15,000 grant, and that's going to cover, 3 or 4 different worker retention strategies, kind of breaking down like what are the anticipated costs for each one of those so that the team can kind of make a determination on like what costs are realistic, and how you are planning to use the funding. Again, this isn't like a formal budget. It can be subject to change, but it's kind of projecting out like what the costs would be, and what you think you're going to need to do all of the strategies that you've outlined. And then really explicitly connecting the strategies to worker retention. So not just explaining like here are the challenges that my business is facing, but how are the strategies that you're proposing going to sort of make an impact for workers. And then just ensuring that the costs and the timeline um, are realistic, based on you know, the details that I've shared previously about the project. Then the last thing, I'd mention here, there are some business criteria that would kind of create some like additional priority for funding. So if you are an employer that is participating in the Department of Labor Shared Work Program, if the jobs that are impacted here, offer benefits and a wage that exceeds the local prevailing wage, that are union roles, or if you are proposing to provide opportunities for employees to develop skills and advance along a career path. These are all sort of things that kind of flag an application as having an additional priority as we're doing sort of our review process. And so if that describes you or your proposal, like I would definitely encourage you to call that out very specifically in the application that you submit. And then the last thing that I want to mention, because this one does come up a lot, is that Grant funds are restricted in that they cannot be used just for like a temporary offset of payroll costs. So an application, for example, that said, we've, recently hired two new receptionists at our main office. They are at risk of a layoff, but, we're going to use the grant funds basically to keep those positions for 3 months. And basically, the grant funding is being used like entirely for wages or for a salary for a specific person. Um, that is not an allowable cost under this project. We are really sort of prioritizing more sort of systemic strategies that are going to kind of make a long-term impact on workforce retention and sustainability, as opposed to kind of like a sort of a band-aid for like payroll or wages. Okay. Um, that's the grant program in a nutshell. This is my contact information. Again, I'll see if I can check the Q&A here in just a moment. But I would encourage you, if you haven't already, check out the website. In fact, let me go back to um, in case you need it, the QR code to our website where a lot of this information already lives. If you have specific questions or you're looking for an update, I would encourage you to contact me directly. And yeah, I think that kind of concludes everything that we wanted to share today. Just one moment while I kind of check in on our Q&A. Okay. Okay, so I see we have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through some of the answers that I can answer live. Um, One question: to what email would we send it if we download the PDF of the application? And you can send that directly to me. Again, let me bring my screen back up. So you can send that directly to me, dgoriski@capitalworkforce.org. Another question, our admin office is in Hartford, but we have programs throughout Connecticut. Can we use this for programs that fall outside of our region? The answer is that to that point, very likely, yes. I would encourage you to apply, and if there are any sort of questions that come up as far as like the locations, we can sort of address that on a case-by-case basis. In addition to the priority areas and allowable activities, do you have any other criteria that you are using to evaluate applications? And if yes, could you share with us? Basically, the on this slide here, um, the this tips for a strong application. Um, these are really the criteria that we are using. So is the risk of layoffs sort of clearly articulated and connected to the strategies that are being proposed? Is the budget and the use of funds both realistic and allowable? Are the costs and time, so are the costs realistic and is the timeline realistic? We're also, things like kind of the number of impacted roles and the quality of those roles is, also a factor. So it's kind of a range of things. We could sort of share more detail after the session. Given the short timeline for project completion, how long do you expect the application review/compliance check and Q&A process to take? This certainly can vary and has varied over the time that this project has been active. But right now we are kind of getting into the closing weeks and months of this project. So we are, assuming that there are no kind of major sort of questions or reworks of the application that come up in the Q&A, and that there are no flags that come out of the compliance check process. Typically, we can we're aiming to sort of go from like an application to a grant award for those that move forward within a couple of weeks. We're really prioritizing kind of getting these done again because of the timeline challenges that are mentioned here. Another question, are you looking at the quantity of jobs to be impacted? Like, yes, absolutely. It, I would encourage you, it's not like the sole determining factor. Um, but, we do consider like the number of jobs and like the quality of those positions. We would look differently at a $10,000 grant application that was going to impact 20 full-time employees versus an application of a similar size that maybe was impacting one or two part-time employees. So that is a factor. That being said, though, if you are a small business, if you have, 5 employees, something like this could really be impacting significantly 20 to 40% of your workforce. And so that it is not a sort of disqualifying reason. If you have, like, if the raw number of positions that are being impacted, is relatively small, please don't let that sort of discourage you from applying. I'm just reviewing some of the additional Q&As that have come in here before. I will be happy to post these slides. We got a question about that. It is, and another question, is it okay for nonprofits to apply? Yes, absolutely. And there's also a question here, is there a minimum number or percentage of employees that would need to be impacted by potential layoffs? And the answer is no. We've gotten applications from businesses of all sizes, some that have cited like really broad sort of workforce challenges across multiple departments. Other times it's been, one or two specific employees. So there's not a minimum number there. I know there are some questions here in the Q&A that we did not get a chance to review. So again, we'll be sort of going through all of those and posting an update and sharing a summary with everybody that had attended or that had registered. For one last time, since we are at 12:59 here, I'll share my information. Again, I'm Dan Garuski. I'm the Manager of Business Engagement at CWP. My email address is right here. Please do not hesitate to contact me. And I, again, want to just thank everybody for their time, attention, their interest in this program. And I'm looking forward to working with some, hopefully all of you, in the really near future. So with that, I think we're going to be calling it for the information session today. I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.